The Cluthas were once part of the fabric of Glasgow and the Clyde, and the little steamboats carried thousands of passengers during their lifetime. In 1878, the Clyde Navigation Act was passed, which allowed the Clyde trustees to construct ferry works and establish a ferry at Stobbe Cross, in the harbour. This act also allowed them to levy and alter rates and to erect and maintain offices. The trustees could also borrow more money, up to £4.5 million, for improvements. On Monday, 14th January 1884, the first Clutha was successfully launched at Rutherglen by Miss Ada Margaret Mitchell, daughter of Mr. J. L. Mitchell, one of the Clyde trustees. Then a lunch was held at the main offices of Seath & Sons, the company that built the boats, for the ladies and gentlemen present that day. On Saturday, 12th April 1884, 3 of the 4 small harbour steamboats began to run between Victoria Bridge and Whiteinch, calling in at Glasgow Bridge, Springfield Lane, Finnieston, Highland Lane, Govan, Meadowside, Sawmill Road and Lint House, a distance of around 3 or so miles. The 4th one came into service shortly afterwards. All of these little boats were called Clutha, numbering 1 to 4, and built by Thomas Seath & Sons of Rutherglen. They measured 74 feet by 13 feet and could carry up to 235 passengers. The engines were placed amidships, and small cabins were placed in front and behind the engine house. In front of the funnel was a low construction which acted as the bridge, where the skipper of the vessel would steer the ship to its stops along the river. At these points were floating landing platforms, which were level with the boat's deck. The fare was a penny for deck passengers, taking them from the first stop to the last, or anywhere in between, as it was a flat rate, although cabin passengers paid slightly more. It would travel down one side of the river and return up the other. The services ran every half hour from 5 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, although as it grew more popular, they ran every 15 minutes, then every 10. The most popular times were in the morning, at lunchtime, and in the evening. Wives or mothers and their children would take a trip down the river just for pleasure on the little boats, especially in fine weather. It was so popular that by the end of that first year, another 2 Cluthas, numbers 5 and 6, were added to the fleet. Built once more by Seaths, they were much larger than their counterparts, measuring 102 feet by 14 feet, which allowed them to carry 350 passengers. In 1890, Clutha No. 7 and Clutha No. 8 came into service, built at Murray's Yard at Dumbarton, while their engines were built by Messrs. Paul and Company. These boats were short steamers, but broader, measuring 80 feet by 16 feet. Their capacity was 315 passengers. A year later, the same company built Cluthas No. 9 and 10, measuring 90 feet by 17 feet, with the capacity for carrying 360 passengers. 5 years later, Cluthas 11 and 12 came into service. They were the same size as numbers 9 and 10, but only capable of carrying 331 passengers. These 2 vessels were built by Messrs. Russell and Company in Port Glasgow, but were the last to be built. All of the boats were twin screws, with a speed of 9 to 10 knots. As competition rose, the Clutha's popularity began to diminish, and with the coming of the subway in January 1897 and the tram system in 1901, the business began to become unprofitable. The last Clutha to run was number 11 on Monday 30th November 1903, skippered by William Sinclair, the oldest skipper of the fleet, along with engineer James Thomson, collector of fares John Macmillan, and the rope boy Albert Henderson. The trustees had decided to abandon them 12 months earlier, but there had been a public outcry, and they had a short reprieve with a limited service. However, it proved to be financially unviable, and Clutha number 11 was tied up, and the penny boats, as they were known, were consigned to history. However, not all of the boats were put out of service. The Clyde trustees retained numbers 1 and 4, with Clutha number 1 being used as a messenger boat, while number 4 was refitted and renamed Comet. Number 2 was bought by Denny and Company of Dumbarton, and number 3 was purchased by Stevedores at Grangemouth. Number 5 went to the London Pleasure Boat Company in the city. Number 6 was bought by Mr. Wilson of Bowness and was put to use during World War I, but in February 1918 she was purchased by Mr. McGilvery at Macduff. Clutha's number 7 and 8 were sold to Hawthorne, Leslie and Company at Hebburn-on-Tyne, and numbers 9 and 10 went to the Admiralty. Number 11 went to Wales and was used by the Mayor and Aldermen of Bangor. She too saw some war service, this time at Preston, then in 1920 was bought by the Borough of Middlesbrough and renamed Lady Magdalen. Mr. McGee of Toome Bridge in Northern Ireland bought number 12, where she was put into service on Lough Neagh and renamed Lough Neagh Queen. She then worked on Loch Leven in the Highlands as the Loch Leven Queen, before being sold to McBrain's in 1911 and renamed Loch Ness. She worked between Inverness and Fort Augustus, carrying mail until 1929. During the 20 or so years of the Clutha services, there were no fatalities or serious incidents with the boats, although shortly after the service began, Clutha number 3 ran full speed into the schooner Lady Helen in Glasgow Harbour on Wednesday 23rd April. While passing berth number 8 on the north side of the harbour, a pin that connected a lever with the engines fell out, causing the boat to become unmanageable. There was little damage to the Clutha, and although 20 or so passengers were alarmed, the boat managed to get free thanks to the help of the river steamer Vivid, which towed her to the middle of the river, and she went on her way. Lady Helen suffered slight damage, however. On 8th February 1891, Clutha number 3 ran into the yacht Midge, and on 9th April 1892, Clutha number 2 was hit by the number 1 Cross River ferry at Kelvinhaw during a gale. Clutha number 2 later sank on 1st March 1895 after an ice floe struck, and she was carried down the river. She was salvaged and returned to work, no worse for wear. In another incident involving passengers, one woman took to the newspapers in 1891 and told how she'd slipped on her way to the cabin for shelter from the rain, falling and bruising her right elbow very severely. She wasn't the only one hurt that day due to the slippy steps on the boat. Another complaint came from a gentleman from Pollokshields the following June, when he noticed his white shirt and collar were marked while sitting behind the funnel. One of the boat's crew told him he should sit in front of it instead. It was the policy of the Clyde Navigation trustees that they were not to be held responsible for damage done by live sparks or dirt of any kind coming from the funnel. The Cluthas left their mark on Glasgow and were talked about fondly many years after their demise. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.